Okay, this is video, Shalom Alaikum, this is video 5, I think it is. Let me see, 1, 2, yeah, 5. Okay, so we're going to start again. Okay, as I said, black women were called for in folklore. They were called the mules of the world, okay, and handed burdens that everyone else, no one else wanted, okay, or everyone else refused to carry. We have also been called matriarchs, superwomen, mean, evil bitch, right, bitches, not to mention castrators and sapphire mamas. Okay, and sapphire mama, as I said, was a good thing. Okay, but it was taken it was taken negatively, right? Okay, so when we have pleaded for understanding, our character has been distorted. When we have asked for simply caring, we have been handed empty inspirational appellations and stuck in the furthest corners. Okay, when we have asked for love, we have been given children and abandoned, right? In short, even our plainer gifts of labor, our labors of fidelity and love have been knocked down our throats, okay? To be an artist and a black woman, even today, lowers our standards in many respects rather than raise it. And yet artists we will be. We will continue to be creative. We have to be creative in order to survive because we don't have the means, all the means we need to do the things we do. We don't have all the money to do the things that we would like to do. So we have to, stitch together, our lives in order to be happy, to provide for our children, and especially those children who were conceived out of the perception of love, right? Now, so therefore we must fiercely pull out of ourselves and look and identify with our lives the living creativity some of our grandmothers were not allowed to know. So now we have the chance to learn about, our gifts and apply them, right? And understand them. Okay, and don't have to live many times according to what she call it, contrary instincts, right? We don't have to. We can live to serve our own needs, right? Okay, rather than forced to serve someone else's, right? It's a challenge. That's why the artistry has to be maintained. The art in oneself, the gifts in oneself have to be maintained, right? They have to be held onto and utilized, not perceived as a curse, right? Have to work through whatever challenges society may pose to you, black woman, right? And still overcome to pursue your goals, your dreams, your aspirations, divine aspirations, right? Okay, and because what you are the divine heirs, okay, to the throne, right? Okay, yeah, okay, so must continue the creativity. I stress some of them, okay, as I said, living creatively, some of our grandmothers were not allowed to know, right? Okay, and she stresses, I stress some of them because it is well known that the majority of our great grandmothers knew even without knowing. That is, they knew things without understanding how they knew it, or how they knew it. Now we have the ability to understand how we know different things. We know about intuition. We know about the history, our ancestral history, right? Okay, and how certain knowledge is passed down through DNA. How our crown chakra opens, and all these different aspects of how knowing can be gained without knowing, right? Without the having gone to an institution that stalks, the learning of others, right? Stockpiles the learning of others in books, right? Okay, so we have that ability. Our grandparents, our great-grandmothers had the ability of knowing without knowing, or how they learned it, right? Okay. In reality, of their spirituality, even if they didn't recognize it. Okay, I'll start back there so you'll know where I am. Okay, so I stress some of them, as in regards to the creativity. They our grandmothers were not allowed to know how they learned it, and this is what she says. I stress some of them because it is well known that the majority of our grandmothers knew how to do things. Okay, they knew how to be creative without knowing how they learned it or how they came across that knowledge. The reality of their spirituality, even if they didn't recognize it, beyond what happened in the singing at a church, and they never had any intention of giving it up. So despite all of their hardships, their difficulties, they didn't give up. That they had to develop, despite all the hardships they had to go through to apply, their gifts. They continued to use them, and they continued to do so, to use their gifts, to access their gifts and utilize their gifts, because for one, that's the only way they had to survive. For two, they want it's been said in here too, they want to continue their legacy. They want to give something to their children, and there are very other reasons why too, and we'll continue to read that. So they didn't give up. Many of them did not give up on their gifts, though they were a burden, though they were seen as cursed, though they were heavy, to try to utilize, despite all the other, let's say contrary, the life they had to live contrary to, their own desires. They still didn't give up their gifts, okay, to be creative, okay, or to be artists, which is basically what, being creative is, okay, and we'll discuss that too. Okay, so how they did it, those millions of black women who were not Phyllis Wheatley or Lucy Terry or France Harper or Laura or Zora Hurston or Nella Larson or Bessie Smith or Elizabeth Catlett or Catherine Dunham either, brings me to the title of this essay, In Search of Our Mother's Garden, which is a personal account. So now she, after her writing, displaying, after her talking about other, writers and experiences and other people's experience, and she talks about how she comes to her writing, how she came to the title of her essay, In Search of Our Mother's Garden, okay, which is a personal account that is yet shared in its theme and its meaning by all of us. I found, while thinking about the far-reaching world of the creative black woman, that often the truest answer to the question that really matters can be found very close. Okay? Make sure I turned on the right page. Okay. It can be found very close. In the late 1920s, my mother ran away from home to marry my father. Marriage, if not running away, was expected of 17-year-old girls. By the time she was 20, she had 2 children and was pregnant with a third. 5 children later, I was born, and this is how I came to know my mother. She seemed a large, soft, loving-eyed woman who was rarely impatient in our home. Her quick, violent temper. Now, this is as I said, how this is a great example of how black women, have been stereotyped to be, quick-tempered and, masculine in temperament, and even given to physical violence, continuously. But in reality, they're very well balanced. Yes, they're strong. Yes, they're passionate, but, not without justification. It's not just, continuous, like some type of live stream, you know, a podcast, you know. So it has its place, you know. Just like the utilization of masculinity is not a live stream podcast either that's continuous. Sometimes men are tender, you know, very tender, especially when they love their family or another individual. Okay? Now, so this is how she came to know her mother. Okay? A loving-eyed woman who was rarely impatient in her home. Her quick, violent temper was on view only a few times a year when she battled with the white landlord who had the misfortune to suggest to her that her children did not need to go to school. She made this is her mother. She made all the clothes we wore, even our brothers' overalls. She made all the towels, the sheets we used. She spent the summers canning vegetables and fruits. She spent the winter evenings making quilts. Quilt enough to cover all our beds. During the working day, she labored not behind my father, in the fields. Okay? Her day began before sunrise and did not end until late at night. There was never a moment for her to sit down undisturbed to unravel her own private thoughts. Never a time free from interruption by work or the noisy inquiries of her many children. And yet it is to my mother and all our mothers who were not famous that I went in search of the secret of what has fed that muzzled and often mutilated but vibrant creative spirit that the black woman has inherited, and that pops out in wild and unlikely places to this day. But when you will ask, did my overworked mother have time to know or care about feeding the creative spirit? The answer is so simple that many of us have spent years discovering it. We have continuously looked high when we should have looked high and low. For example, in the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C., there hangs a quilt unlike any other in the world, in fanciful, inspired, and yet simple and identifiable figures. It portrays the story of the crucifixion. It is considered rare beyond price, though it follows no known pattern of quilt making, and though it is made of bits and pieces of worthless rags, it is obviously the work of a person of powerful imagination and deep spiritual feeling. Below this quilt, I saw a note that says it was made by an anonymous black woman in Alabama 100 years ago. If we could locate this anonymous black woman from Alabama, she would turn out to be one of our grandmothers, an artist who left her mark in the only material she could afford and in the only medium her position in society allowed her to use. Okay? And she quotes another writer, Virginia Woolf, who wrote, in order for a woman to be a writer or artist in the 16th century, she needed a room of her own, a key and a lock, and a income of her own, right? And then it was, I put in brackets, also refer that to a black woman who had no home of her own, no room of her own, not even her body of her own. So imagine how difficult it was for her to be an artist, okay, or to express herself, you know, in the manner she desired to be perceived, okay, or the manner by which she perceived life, right? Okay, independently to contrary instincts, right? Okay, so Virginia Woolf wrote in a room of her own, right? Because that was the name of the book. Yet genius of a sort must have existed among women, okay, as it must have existed among the working class. Now, we are prompt to change, to add, in addition to the working class, imagine a slave, okay? Geniusness must have also existed among those who were held in bondage of slavery, and the wives and daughters of sharecroppers, so genius must have existed in them as well. Not only the working class, the lower or the poor working class, or the working class, okay, of the 16th century, right? In a room of, as it relates to the book A Room of Her Own. Now, and again, in Emily Bonnet's, okay, Emily Bonnet, or a Robert Burns, okay, okay, these are other writers. You get to change this to Zora Hort, okay, Hurston, and or Richard Wright, okay, as it relates to, you know, those were geniuses too, right? Okay, lays out to prove its presence, okay? Okay, so in Virginia's book, she's saying that, okay, genius had to exist among the working class, okay? And so it would say, okay, if genius existed in the working class, it must have existed in bondage. People held in bondage. It must be slaves as well, you know. It must, and the daughters of sharecroppers as well. An example of that is what? Let me make sure I got it right. Okay. Okay, so she's saying the genius is blazed out. This is Virginia Woolf saying genius is blazed out, and it to prove its presence, right? So it says, okay, so the same can be said about genius is blazed out in Emily Bonnet or Robert Burns. No. It blazed out in Zora Hurston or Richard Wright. Okay. Who were, you know, oppressed African, you know, artists, you know, who were, you know, artists despite, you know, are, you know, geniuses who, you know, who were able to, you know, express their geniusness, you know, even under the most adverse conditions, you know. Yeah, okay. And it was expressed in, like, the quilt, right? Like, you know, through the through the venue that was she left her mark in the materials that she could afford, okay, or the mediums of her position in the society, okay, that she was allowed to use, right? Okay. So, okay. No, sir. So, but certainly this is still Virginia Woolf, but certainly it never got itself onto paper, okay? Many of the African artists, okay, their name, many of the African, you know, artists, never, you know, got their, like this one in Alabama. You don't know their names, okay? You have their work, but not their names and things like that, right? So they're anonymous, okay? So, however, one reads of a witch being ducked, or a woman possessed by devils, or, you know, sainthood, like a black woman, like what's her name, Phyllis Wheatley, or Alice Walker's mother, right? or a wise woman selling herbs, or root worker. That's how she's translating, a wise woman selling herbs. Alice Walker's giving us the inference to, when you hear that, you can think of, when you think of a wise woman selling herbs, you can also think of a black woman selling, roots, to which are, for healing, right? Medicine worker, a medicine woman, right? Or when you think of a woman selling roots, you think of a black woman as a medicine worker, right? Like in Africa, a medicine man, right? Okay. Or even a very remarkable man who had a mother. Then I think we are on the track of a lost novelist, a suppressed poet, or some mute or inglorious Jane Austen. Okay. Indeed, I would venture to guess that Annan, who wrote so many poems without signing them, was often a woman, right? So, again, so we're saying, if geniusness can be expected to, is expected to, blaze out or be exposed in, or seen in the working class, and it was should have been expected to be. It's not uncommon to expect it in. Shouldn't be uncommon to expect it in black women, or it shouldn't be uncommon to expect it in women who were held in bondage. And the fact that they were held in bondage, and it came out, it was demonstrated. In people such as Phyllis Wheatley. As she saw her freedom as a goddess, and saw the divinity and could write about it, and many of our grandmothers who, knew things without having, it been validated by, the institution of the learned, right? Or the institution of collective learnings, the collective learning of others, right? In books, right? Or institutionalized in books, right? The learning of others institutionalized in books, right? Or so just because they didn't get their knowledge that way, it's not validated, okay? Or many times it's anonymous, right? Or it's left anonymous, or it's seen as crazy, right? Okay. Like I said, Michael Jackson and so many other African artists. Okay, they're like, they try to call Michael Wacko Jackal, right? Despite he's a genius, but they don't want to give him credit for that, because what? Then it diminishes their status, right? Because like I said, how can they justify themselves as superior if those whom they oppress, demonstrate, attributes beyond what society tries to scapegoat them as or castigate them as, so they're demeaned, right, as wackos or crazy person or insane people, right, when in reality they're geniuses, right? And their artistry, which is their constructive way of living successfully to achieve their goals, right, independent of anybody else's design, marks them as a genius, right? Okay, not wackos or insane people or crazy or lunatics, right? Okay, that's just a means by which to demean them or steal their legacies, right? Or overlook their legacies. What does it say? It says, am I invisible? Don't think I'm invisible because you ignore me. Okay, am I invisible because you ignore me? I'm not invisible because you ignore me. Okay? Because you ignore me, sometimes that just means you're ignorant. Okay? Okay? Or, okay. And I'm talking to those with plantation consciousness, not my brothers and sisters that come from my mother that are on the deeper end of the spectrum of humanity, right? The age spectrum, as it relates to the age spectrum, or the timeline of humanity's timeline. I'll put it that way. Okay? Okay, so now, and our mothers and grandmothers have often than not, let me do it again. So our mothers and grandmothers have more often than not anonymously handed on the creative spark, the seed of the flower they themselves never hoped to see, or like a sealed letter they could not plainly read. So they passed on their, like I said, the legacy. They passed on their creative spirit. They passed on their geniusness. Okay, that spark of geniusness, that spark of creativity. They pass it off to their seeds. Okay, but they pass it off, and they would never, they would never be able to, because of the time they lived in, though they used their gifts, they were not able to recognize the greatness of it. You know what I'm saying? It was like a legend in their own time. Okay? They only became a legend after their time. They only became a recognized legend after their time. You see what I'm saying? And their geniusness was passed off to their their children. They inherited their geniusness, and they were able to their generations after them, their descendants were able to as she said in here, they were able to know, to understand it, whereas their grandmothers and great grandmothers and mothers before me, they couldn't understand their gifts and their talents. They knew without knowing. Now we can know why we do what we do. We can understand our geniusness, okay? Our creative geniusness, like Michael Jackson, the King of Kings, the King of Kings, the King of Man, the Man of Mans, okay? The one which this Jackson Green arc is dedicated to, these video conversations, okay? Okay. So we'll never have a conversation where we don't mention the legacy, okay? Because again, that's a legacy the Green Arc is dedicated to, right? Okay. So, the seed of flower. Okay, I read that. Okay, and so it is certainly with my own mother. Unlike me, Ma Rain's eyes songs, which retained their creator's name, even while blasting forth from Bessie Smith's mouth. No song or poem will ever bear my mother's name. Okay? Yet, so many of the stories that I write, that we all write, are my mother's stories. Only recently did I fully realize this, that through years of listening to my mother's stories of her life, I have absorbed not only the stories themselves, but something of the manner in which she spoke, something of the urgency that involves the knowledge that her stories, like her life, must be recorded. It is probably for this reason that so much of what I have written is about characters whose counterparts in real life counterparts in real life are so much older than I am. Okay? But the telling of these stories which come from my mother's lips is naturally as breathing was not the only way my mother showed herself as an artist, for stories too were subject to being distracted, to dying without conclusion. Dinners must be started, the cotton must be gathered before the big rain. The artist that was and is my mother showed itself to me only after many years. Showed itself to me only after many years. This is what I finally noticed. Like Mim, okay, a character in the third life of Grange Copeland, my mother adorned with flowers whatever shabby house we were forced to live in. And okay, we're going to go to video 6, I believe. Let me make sure. We're going to go to video 7.